Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I want to discuss a particular aspect of the new Brexit deal which has persuaded the DUP to reform the Stormont Executive. Doesn't seem to be getting a lot of mainstream media attention yet. I think it might. Essentially, in order to win the DUP over, Rishi Sunak has just put all our food bills up again. That's nice, isn't it? But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel. So, when I did a preview video of the Brexit deal, which had won the DUP over on Tuesday, I hadn't seen it, so it was essentially speculative. I did say there must be a con somewhere. I didn't think it would be conning the EU because then we're back into trade war territory, which Sunak has made clear he wants to avoid at all costs. And although I'm yet to see expert feedback on this deal, I am confident that this new deal doesn't attempt to renege on our promises to the EU. How do I know? Because no one's really complaining about it. The EU Commission, I haven't seen attack it. Sinn Féin support it. In Britain, Labour, the Lib Dems, I think the SNP as well, I've seen support it. If it risked more political friction and therefore a trade war, there would be political objections to this deal. Quite widespread ones, in fact. There are none. Everyone seems to like it. Everyone's fine with it. So the deal has to be screwing someone else over. If it's not the EU, who is it? Turns out it's us. Now, I'm still waiting for detailed analysis from experts on the deal, as I say, which may take a few days and will add certain, extra context. But I had to read myself, and one thing really jumped out at me. Page 35, UK-wide labelling requirements. Now, the Windsor Framework abolished a lot of checks on goods in the Irish Sea with the establishment of the Green Lane, because the Brexiteers kept arguing, look, if these goods are going to Northern Ireland and only to Northern Ireland, why do they need to be checked? And I would keep saying to them, how do you know which goods are only going to Northern Ireland if you don't check? Well, they'll just say they might be lying. You need a system that says we are confident that this is not going to end up in the Republic of Ireland. So as with the Green Lane, as long as goods were definitely just bound for Northern Ireland to remain in Northern Ireland, yes, you need no full style EU style checks. But how do you know which goods? Well, you have a registration and tracking system for trusted traders and a requirement that these agri-food products would need a not for EU label on them. So they can't be sold outside the UK. The label will go, no, this is not for sale here. Now, we've seen these labels in operation. We've seen them in Britain as well. And this is because it's too expensive to have two production lines, one for Britain and one for Northern Ireland, right? So if you're a producer, let's say you're making a particular type of ready meal or something, and you supply customers in Britain and Northern Ireland, you use the label on everything to cut costs. It's cheaper just to have one production line for Britain and Northern Ireland than just to have a separate one for Northern Ireland alone. But if you don't supply Northern Ireland at all, you have no customers in Northern Ireland, then you don't need this registration. You don't need this labelling. So you do without it because it's an extra cost for nothing. If your goods are only for the GB market, don't need it. But that is going to change. As a result of this deal, legislation is being passed this week, today in fact I think, to mandate all agri-food producers to label their products not for EU if they're not exporting them to the EU. So to use an example that someone asked me about on Twitter, they gave an example of, say, a small business in North Wales producing Welsh oggies. They supply a few shops in North Wales. It's a local food produced by a small local business. They don't distribute its products very far. Certainly none are sold in Northern Ireland, right? So I was asked, is this small business going to have to adopt these rules then and have these costs for no customers? Now, what I would say, just to be clear, is I've not seen any exemptions in the deal as published. So if the legislation were being properly debated and scrutinised in Parliament, I think things like this would come up. And I think maybe there would be an exemption for businesses below a certain turnover, right? So although I can't say for certain that there is no such exemption, what I can say is I've seen no evidence of it. So as far as I can tell, that small business in North Wales will absolutely have to go to the expense of registering to use a system they'll never use and redesign their labels to incorporate the not for EU marker. It may be that if this does blow up in a big way, maybe an exemption will be added later. But at this point, you can see two consequences now. First of all, you have got this extra cost, which, as far as I can tell, will affect even very small businesses. Great, just what they need in the current economic climate. Second, it means every single agri product becoming more expensive because of the cost of the registration and the labelling, which will be passed on to the consumer. Rishi Sunak has just given inflation a little bit of an injection to appease what? A few dozen Brexit ideologues. And this is ideology. The Northern Ireland Protocol and the Windsor Framework upgrade gives Northern Ireland's economy a competitive advantage. It's the only place in the world, the entire world, which can export to both Britain and the EU single market, two of the largest markets in the world, hassle-free. Rishi Sunak himself said last year, no one else has that. Nowhere else has that, I think he said specifically. The DUP could have used that as an argument against reunification. I've said so for a long time. After all, if Ireland reunifies, that means a hard trade border with Britain, which is a huge market for them. And for those who go, oh, but the single market's a larger market. It's like, well, not necessarily for Northern Ireland at the moment, but it doesn't matter because they already have free access to that. So reunifying wouldn't give them easier access to the single market. It's the same access. They just lose that access to the British market. That's a real argument if you're a unionist, isn't it? But the DUP turned what was an economic benefit of Brexit for them into an ideological downside. And now we're all paying the price. The DUP have published a shiny poster stating 10 benefits of the deal. Some of them are subjective. Some are already in place with the Windsor Framework. They're not new. But there are things which I think are objectively wrong as far as I can tell. And they might cause trouble when the DUP work this one out. Jeffrey Donaldson says that the deal will abolish all checks in the Irish Sea. No, it won't. The deal itself claims that more than 80% of all freight between Britain and Northern Ireland will not face checks in the Irish Sea border. So even the published deal says that up to 20% of freight will still be subject to checks. Now, obviously some of that freight is intended for the EU single market via Ireland. It may be that Donaldson and the DUP only care about the internal UK trade. So, oh yeah, if there's stuff going to Dublin, we don't care about that. But I see nothing in the deal which says that the reason for this over 80% is because that's basically, or there's nothing in the deal, as far as I can tell, unless I've missed it, that says all of the internal trade will be check-free. So there, in other words, there will be goods that are bound for Northern Ireland to remain in Northern Ireland that will still be considered at risk and therefore be subject to checks. The DUP also claim that it will boost UK trade within the Union. No, it's making internal trade more expensive, so how can it possibly boost it? Now, don't get me wrong, I get part of the rationale. So imagine this, right? This is their argument. So imagine a food producer. They're in Britain. They supply customers only in Britain, right? They don't ever export to the EU and they don't ever export to Northern Ireland. So they don't need this new labelling or registrations. Well, until after today anyway. But at the moment, they don't need them. So then let's say a customer from Belfast rings them and says, oh, I've heard you do this really nice stuff. We'd like an order, please. And that producer has to say, sorry, I can't actually supply you because it would be too expensive to get the registrations and the labelling and all that business. So, sorry. So that's the DUP's argument. You've now got this producer who will happily supply any customer in Britain, but not Northern Ireland. So that's like created this wedge between Britain and Northern Ireland, which they don't like. What this new rule does is it makes everyone pay for the registrations and labelling, whether they need it or not. So that then if a customer from Belfast does put an order in, there's no reason to not fulfill it. So that's the DUP's thinking. But the practical upshot, this only works by making everyone pay a Brexit red tape cost so that they don't have excuses for not supplying Northern Ireland. Because if it wouldn't make business sense to pay for all that red tape to supply one customer in Belfast, it sure as hell doesn't make business sense to pay for all that red tape for no customers at all. And yet that is what they're now going to be made to do. Every relevant business in the UK is going to have to pay these costs now and change their production. Those who do supply Northern Ireland profitably have already spent the money. They've already done it. These registrations, these labels are already in effect. So this deal doesn't affect them. It only affects those businesses who don't supply Northern Ireland. So this is a cost for British consumers because of Northern Ireland Unionists. Some, Northern Ireland unionists. Not sure it's a great way of selling the union to people in Britain. Hey, your food's going to be more expensive now, but don't worry, the DUP are happy. That's worth it, is it? Okay. Are they going to stay happy forever? Oh, no. In a few months' time, they'll work out, actually, there's going to be some checks after all. They'll all go to hell again. Stormont will be back in mothballs before you know it. All right. And we're still going to be left with the more expensive food then. Oh, yes, that's permanent. Great. And that's just what jumped out for me. I'm expecting trade experts to spot all sorts of interesting wrinkles with this deal, which didn't seem to involve major stakeholders because it was all being kept very secret. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.